She had a knowledge of what makes a man tick. I mean, things she learned from the ground up. And men could see that she knew and could play their game. And that's what attracted them to her, beside the fact that she was quite beautiful, quite beautiful.
Well, there was something honeyed about her, something fetching. Her smile and her conscious sexuality.
She was a gifted comedian, in my opinion. There's no question about that. She understood comedy. She had developed herself. Nobody gave her that peculiar, those marvelous mannerisms, the thin, high voice, the funny look, whatever was Marilyn, you know, that people imitate and never quite come up to. That was all her.
And the great success of MONROE, I think, was that she did not infuriate the female. By that I mean, if I told my wife after I worked or saw a picture with MONROE, let's say, she said, "My God, I'm crazy about her," she says, she would understand it. But if I told her, "Boy, God, do I wish I could spend the night with Farrah Fawcett Major," she would hit me in the mouth.
She looked for love as anyone does who wants something simple out of life, and I believe she did. She didn't particularly care for money. She didn't particularly want to collect things, and I think she wanted to be married and have children.
Some people could talk their way into her and get a lot of things from her just by giving them a sad story. And a lot of them did when we first started. She gave one a car for a while, her own car, 41 Pontiac, I remember it. I mean, that was back in the early days, you know, and Marilyn only was a stock kid. She didn't make that any money like that.
I'd say, "Well, Marilyn, why do you have to do this way? Because it costs a great deal of money." She said, "Don't worry, it's tax deductible." Everything was tax deductible, she thought. Had no idea about money, none.
There was a sort of a childishness about her that you felt that she should be protected from anything that could be disturbing to her. In California, there's a law that a child who has been abandoned before the age of 16 has no responsibility to their parents. But Marilyn never shirked the responsibility. When she was making $250 a week, she was paying for her mother's care.
Did she visit her mother much then?
No, she didn't. But her reason for it was because it would be upsetting to her mother. Mrs. Ely's particular area of disturbance was on the subject of religion. And she felt that anyone who was in the entertainment business, you know, was just not all that you should be.
We would have like 300 extras, and she would show up in 2 in the afternoon. And I said, "What happened?" And she said, "I lost my way." Now, she stayed at the same house. The studio was not moved overnight, and she had lost her way.
Nobody could say, "Look, this is a professional commitment. You must do it. You go on whether you feel good or not." She could not do it until she herself was ready.
She just was frightened, inferiority complex. She'd be there in time and would say she'd play around. And the worst thing was when she had to sing a song or something later on, which she could do nicely. She wasn't a great voice, but a nice voice. She would just pick up anything. The eyebrow's wrong or something, you know, to redo it, or anything not to just appear out there.
Part of the myth of Marilyn is that she was the dumb blonde idea. And they were always a little surprised when I emphatically and truthfully said she was very bright. She was, really witty. And not in a well-read sense, but in her responses.
She knew what she had been originally used for, which was the rear-end wiggler and the sex symbol and the big-bosomed girl. But underneath it was it's like the comedian who says he wants to do Hamlet. I'm sure that Marilyn felt stifled and stymied by that caricature that she came to represent.
She did not have the disposition, the evenness, or the talents of some other actors. There's no question. But what she was doing was fighting and using more of what she had. It was more of a struggle for her.
She was just a perfectionist the way she wanted herself to be, acting-wise, singing-wise, or anything else. That's the only reason these coaches, got to her, and she worked with them so much, because she thought they could improve her so much. And if she would have just been her cute little self, she'd have been so much better.
I really feel that part of her attraction for Joe, I'm quite sure that she loved him, but it was the fact that he had a big family, because before they were married, why, every weekend Marilyn flew up to San Francisco to be with his family. And I think she liked the idea of being a part of a family.
He was the tops in his profession. He's all-American. She liked the all-American thing.
She would watch. She was a very observant attendee. Once she did a scene, once. She did a scene from O'Neill's Anna Christie, and it was lovely, lovely to watch. Very vulnerable, very sensitive.
What effect do you think the Actors Studio had upon her? Did it do her a lot of good?
Well, not if you ask certain directors that she encountered who felt that it slowed her up, it made her impossible. But I'm amazed at her eagerness to learn and her desire to learn.
He was deeply and rather astonishingly involved with Arthur Miller, a serious and intellectual playwright.
She thoroughly admired him. She thought he was a great talent and a great writer. I think he used her. The way he announced her engagement was bizarre. He announced it to the press in Washington when he was up there for the House Un-American Affairs Committee, then telephoned her in New York and told her what he'd done.
I think he saw in her a vulnerable lady, and he could protect her against all hostile forces, and she saw in him a father, a man with knowledge, a creative person, and that's what she wanted.
She was a difficult woman. You know, we like to always say the nicest things about her, and she deserves them. She was a very gallant person, but she was troubled and brought that whole baggage of her emotional difficulties of childhood with it. She was very insecure. She had psychiatrists in attendance, if not every day, a number of times a week.
The thing that she wanted most in the world was to be a mother, to have a child of her own.
Or she could have right away had some children, a child at least, because she loved children so much. My child, you know, my daughter, and other people's children, she went for them, or puppies or anything, you know. And she had one of her own to take care of her, a doll of her own, you know, to grow up with. I'm sure it would have helped her mentally.
She wasn't a happy type that just go on a one-take actress. Quite the contrary. She was filled with anxiety and apprehension.
I think that the help that she got from the director added just a little bit. The help she got from her studies with various acting groups, I think only confused her. I think that she was born with something that is beyond directing.
Billy had given her every conceivable kind of direction, using obstacles, counterpoints, relating to your grandmother's raincoat, whatever. I have never heard such brilliant, marvelous, diversified direction given to one actor in my life. All of them legitimate, all of them within the realm of legitimate behavior of that character in that circumstance. Nothing worked. Still, it would be sorry, and the hands would go again, and we'd start again. About take 44, Billy finally said, when Marilyn said, sorry, again, he said, oh, well, I tell you, Marilyn, possibly if you were to, and she said, just a moment, Billy, don't talk to me now. I'll forget how I want to play it. Well, I tell you, that did it. I blew the next two takes.
No matter how you suffered through those days and weeks and pulling those lines out like a dentist, they looked so absolutely and totally natural once you see them, and you loved on the screen, and that's the one that's thing that survived, you know.
The girl that did the Asphalt Jungle was tremulous, young, aspiring, ambitious. The one that was in The Misfits was not tremulous, but trembling, an addict. She became dependent on drugs to go to sleep. I think she was afraid of not being herself, and the next day not being her most beautiful.
What was happening away from the film was infinitely more dramatic, because her marriage was just breaking up. He was in one suite, she was in another. They would get together. We'd have a press conference. There was a coldness and a hardness in their relationship. And yet, on the set, in the film, she had to be this lovely lady falling in love with this cowboy, Clark Gable. That turmoil in her, that was what I think was what was making her ill.
We had to stop the picture. She was a very sick girl.
Was she sick close to death?
No, sick like an addict is sick. They took her to a hospital in Los Angeles, and she was under care of a psychiatrist, and to get her off the drugs.
And what was she like when she came back?
She looked quite repaired, and was only a few days before she was, I discovered, back into the drugs again.
And certainly Kennedy was in the habit of visiting her in California.
He came to the house one day, and I opened the door for him, and Marilyn was out in the garden. He went out there, and then he stayed about a half an hour or so and left. And she came to me immediately, and she said, "Isn't he nice?" He said, "Say thank you to the lovely lady who opened the door."
I felt that a man who was the father of 10 children with the 11th child in escrow didn't have any right to be fooling around. Now, I didn't know that he was, excepting for the fact that in going through Marilyn's possessions, I found a letter that his sister Jean Smith had written to Marilyn in response to a letter that Marilyn had written extending sympathy over the old man's stroke, in which Jean Smith said, "We understand that you and Bobby are an item, and we hope when you come back that he will come with, or we hope when he comes back that you will come with him."
Do you think she was very much in love with him?
I think that she appreciated having him as one of her admirers, but I don't know more than that. I couldn't, as a layman, couldn't describe her as depressed. But I know she had many worries, and this particular day she was not lively and enthusiastic. She was very quiet.
Was she in the mood of a person who would later deliberately take her own life?
I doubt that very much. And she had told me that one of the very first things to warn me that if she takes sedation, which she did every night, sometimes she's apt to forget and would take a second dose too soon. And this is what she had to be very careful about. So that was the first thing that I was concerned about after she died, that probably had happened when she went to the telephone.
She was drinking some champagne, not a great deal, but she had several very emotionally disturbing calls, one from Joe DiMaggio's son. And that disturbed her very much because she was very close to him, as she was to Arthur Miller's children. And he was in San Diego, the boy, and he was calling her, was very upset because his engagement had just been broken. So
She was a primitive, a naive, an honest person, an idealist. And every time she'd run counter to what was evil or bad in a society, she'd suffer for it.
She had no handle on life. But by God, she had some other things, that if we knew what they were, we could sell that patent to DuPont and they could manufacture it. Because one would think that it's not that difficult. Maybe it's tough to make another garbo. But it should be easy. A blonde, small girl with a sweet face. My God, there should be thousands of them. They come from all over the world. Doesn't make him Monroe.